Welcome to BRK3088, Azure Stack Development Kit and Why It Matters. My name is Charles Joy. I'm a Principal Program Manager on the Azure Stack team. My Twitter handle is @OrchestratorGuy. I don't tweet a lot, but when I do, it's about updates and things like that. So feel free to follow me there. This session, I have delivered this session a couple times. I've even recorded a YouTube video. It's up on my YouTube channel where I put other videos. And some of the stuff I go through in demos will be, it's already up there, so you could reference it there. But I'm going to add, I guess, a certain event flair to this session. One thing I've never done before in a session, and I will do here, is talk through some troubleshooting tips and like the top 5 things you should look for if it fails before you redeploy. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to get yourself out of the issue, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Some of you don't even know what Azure Stack is, I assume, right? Is anyone, this the first time you've heard about Azure Stack or anything? Okay, so I have some level setting slides. I don't want to get too ahead of myself. So let's get rolling with this. Now, this is a specific session for the Azure Stack Development Kit, which is the one node instantiation of Azure Stack. What you heard about announced and what's generally available is actually the production or multi-node solution. But we'll get into that. So first, we'll do a quick Azure Stack overview. And I got to remember not to look because watching my words come out of my mouth is very distracting. So just again, quick overview. So Azure Stack is an extension of Azure. It's the only consistent hybrid cloud platform where we have Azure, Azure Stack, and a consistency that we bake into the product. And then we're really feeding from Azure. We're an extension of Azure. So when you're thinking about, should I go to Azure Stack, first question you should probably ask is, am I in Azure? Do I have stuff in Azure? Can I go to Azure first? And if you can, great, because Azure Stack may be able to fill more scenarios out as you find that you go and say, I need something that's on premises. I need this. My scenario needs to be hybrid, where I have apps and bifurcated in 2 different places. So there's the right way to think about Azure Stack, and I probably went into it a little bit. So what it is, it's the first hybrid cloud platform. What it's not, it's not a virtualization replacement play. We're not looking to replace your existing virtualization regardless of what it's on. We're not asking you to take your VMs and put them onto Azure Stack. This is more of a hybrid application platform. What it is, it's an integrated system with self-service IaaS, PaaS, and cloud solutions. What it's not, and this is a general statement about Azure Stack, not the one node. It's not DIY infrastructure. The only thing about Azure Stack that could be remotely construed as DIY is the one node, because it's software that you can download from the internet and install on one single server that you have. Not production, it's just kick the tires kind of development kit thing. But as a broad statement about Azure Stack in general, for production, you cannot use your own hardware. You procure your hardware as like an appliance from one of the OEM vendors that we're working with. What it is, it's regularly updated for Azure consistency. We have an update, patch and update methodology. You may have seen that session. Justin's doing a couple of them. What it's not a static system you deploy and forget. It's not something that you just install and hope it just continues to work on old versions. This is something that will take a certain amount of care and feeding, and to keep it up to date with security and Azure consistency, compliance, and things like that. And finally, what it is. It's a cross-platform hybrid cloud. And what it's not, a Windows-only cloud. We have many workloads that are non-Windows, but we have many workloads that are Windows. So the infrastructure and the base of everything to this point, up to this point, and even on one node you can go investigate, is all Windows. All the VMs that run in the one node are Windows Core 2016, and the host that you're on is actually a full server, as it's one of your primary places to get to. Now, again, that statement is all about the one node. Multi-node, you don't really have access to much in the one node or the multi-node because it's the cloud. It's a sort of a black box cloud. And there's three ways to access production Azure Stack. There's the portals, which you're familiar with, the APIs via PowerShell or SDK, and then a privilege endpoint, which is for emergency cases of support and things like that, or to get logs or things like that. That's for multi-node. This session's about single node, or ASDK, where because we're giving you the software and you're doing it on your own hardware, we have to sort of open things up a bit and you can play around. Now, I don't want you to get the indication that you'll be able to do that in a multi-node system. You won't. In fact, we take away the credentials and the accounts completely that you have access to in the one node. So one node's good for kicking the tires and getting used to it. But some of the troubleshooting things I'll show you in one node have nothing to do with multi-node. My goal here for one node and troubleshooting one node is to get you going on one node and the ability to keep it running. Multi-node's a whole other animal. Support of that is Microsoft or OEM support, and there's a whole process for that. So again, these are level setting Azure Stack slides. The Azure Stack promise in general is a consistent application development, consistent application development, Azure services available on premises, and integrated delivery experience. So the next question usually when people see this slide is, what Azure services do you have? Well, as we said in a couple slides earlier, IaaS, compute network storage, so VMs, VM scale sets, things like that. Lots you can do there. In fact, a lot of applications are built on IaaS today. So, and PaaS. So we have a SQL RP, a MySQL RP, which are essentially adapters that let you connect into existing or newly deployed SQL or MySQL instances, and offer up the ability to create self-service databases on top of those existing servers, and app service, which includes Azure Function. So that right now at GA, that's what we have available, and that's what we have available in both multi-node and one node, or ASDK. Now, ASDK, if you've been following along, we've been, and I'll have a slide on this, we've been doing this for quite some time now. Some of you may have had, it was previously called the POC, and we've had at least app service SQL, MySQL since TP2, I think. So a lot of these things have been hardened over time in an effort to make them GA ready, in the current time frame. A couple more level setting slides. So some of you have seen this slide, but we want Azure services everywhere. We have 42 regions as of today, and this may be out of date. I did update it recently. 42 Azure regions. We hope after launch and starting now, hundreds of service providers providing Azure services, and of course, thousands of enterprises. So we're spreading the Azure services around the globe and making it available in regions where Azure wasn't available, but now it can be available via Azure Stack. And then I think finally, for the overview flat slides, there's primary use cases that we want folks to concentrate on for Azure and Azure Stack, and they're hybrid use cases. So edge and disconnected solutions, cloud applications to meet varied regulations, and cloud application model on premises, basically ARM on premises. So I'm not going to go into detail on any of these because there's specific sessions and demos on this, and this is just the idea. And nowhere on this slide do we say lift and shift your IaaS resources, your virtualization resources. Is it possible to do that? Yes, it's possible to do a lot of things with computers, but to get the best user experience out of Azure and Azure Stack, we're recommending hybrid use cases that fall into these categories. And if you need follow-up on these categories, you can come to the booth. We have lots of discussion points on that, but I don't want to belabor on this point here. So now to the agenda for the one node, since we're sort of level set, and I'm happy to take questions afterwards once we get through the content and the demos. So what I want to talk through for the Azure Stack Development Kit is the who, what, why, when, and where, I guess. The architecture of the dev kit, what it is and what it isn't, and that would be specific to Azure Stack Development Kit, not Azure in general, Azure Stack in general. What a deployment kind of looks like, and I actually have demo to kick that off. Deployment tasks and gotchas, references, getting started, what's new, and then of course I added some demo stuff in at the end. So let's get through the who, what, where, and when and why. Why should you care about the Azure Stack Dev Kit? It's the one node instantiation of Azure Stack. Well, it allows you to hit the ground running It allows you to understand the impacts of IT service delivery, because it's sort of getting your feet wet in the whole new process of cloud and cloud on premises. Prepare your IT teams, because there's an operator persona and then there's a user persona. And then you get to experience new capabilities in a dev kit environment. So we'll have, if you don't have a multi-node yet and you want to see what that experience looks like, the dev kit will give you a preview of that. If you have one and you want to see how it works, do a little development in one and testing in one and then move it to production, that's fine too. In general, the Azure Stack Development Kit allows you to start preparing your organization for new operating models today or now. Who should be interested in the Azure Stack OneNode Dev Kit? It's targeted for the following folks. People who are interested in an Azure consistent cloud experience, someone interested in demonstrating Azure Stack and services applications on Azure Stack. Again, kicking the tires of Azure and Azure Stack production. Now, this isn't production, but you could start using your ARM templates, see if they work, see if they'll match with the profile or the versions that are available. You could develop hybrid or modern applications, and you get the concept of cloud administrator or operator, cloud admin or operator personas in Azure Stack. And if you're looking to get Azure Stack operator, the certification in that, this would be a great way to sort of get started down that road, because then you could use the OneNode towards that end. So what is the Azure Stack Dev Kit? Well, the idea behind the Dev Kit or OneNode is it's a limited deployment durations. I'd say on average now on decent hardware it's 4 to 5 hours. So kick it off, come back 4 or 5 hours later, and you have Azure Stack ready for you. Minimal nodes, very minimal, 1. No network gear other than a NIC that's on the machine, and we do the rest via software. You have to have storage and stuff like that, but you get the idea. It's a reduced component install. It's not HA. So when I talk about if it goes down, well, it's not resilient. It's a one-node thing. Storage things happen. Storage fills up. Connectivity stuff happens. A lot of things happen. And we don't have redundancy in the OneNode. It's one of the main reasons it wouldn't be ready for production. But what this does is it reduces the amount of components that it install. So instead of 3 DCs, which you get with a multi-node, it's 1 DC. Instead of 3 XRP VMs, there's 1 XRP VM. You get the idea there. It's easy to install. It's actually a little bit more complex than multi-node, because multi-node's done by the OEM and you don't have to do anything. So single node is you installing it. We give you a script, you put some parameters in, wait for 5 hours, and hopefully it comes out fully baked at the end. It enables on-premises Azure Modern Application Development. It's ARM. If you have ARM applications, you can deploy them if they meet the size requirements and the VM sizes and the PAS requirements that you may have. The perfect place for kicking the tires there. And it can integrate into a larger environment. Now, that's an interesting statement, because some of that is future. Right off the bat, it does not, it's not on your network. It's in your network via a NAT that you could go sort of outbound with. So there's some constraints there. You have the ability to VPN into it, so that opens up a little bit. So if you have Visual Studio on your laptop, you VPN into the Azure Stack environment, and you sort of feel like you're in the same space. Eventually, what we'd like to get to is that it gets more integrated. But that means we're putting something that's essentially going to be redeployed every month on your network, taking up network space if that's what you want, even if it's a lab network, and then reserving those IPs, and then it's going to be blown away and redone. And if that's fine, that's the direction we're going to go. So if you're interested in having it on your network, and there are scripts that other folks have done that haven't come from us out there that'll show you how to do it, go to user voice and put that feedback in there so I can prioritize it to get it in. Now I will tell you, OneNode feedback, while we take it and prioritize it, is lower than multi-node feedback for obvious reasons. But we do take the feedback, and I'll get to that in a bit. So where can Azure Stack Dev Kit be deployed? Well, essentially it's any system that meets the minimum hardware requirements. And the minimum hardware requirements aren't that bad. And some people have cobbled this together for a few $1,000s. Some people go and buy, a big one for multi-thousands dollars. It really is up to you. I have examples of both in my demonstrations. And, while bigger will give you more capacity and might be faster, you can get away with, for one node, on a lower end machine. Now, you'll do less and be able to do less things, but if you're just looking to kick the tires, it may be just enough. So this means existing data center system or large workstation machines, minimum requirements. There's a link to the minimum requirements. You can find it on our docs. Essentially, the minimum requirements are 96 gig of RAM. Why don't I just click on the thing since I can? That's not what I wanted. Yeah, couldn't find my mouse. So these are the minimum requirements: 96 gig of RAM, 4 disks. The more storage, the better. In fact, you'll see a reason why for that in a little bit. 200 gig OS disk, and then 12 cores or more. And it can be and the base OS doesn't matter as long as it can, because we're going to be doing boot from VHD. So that's the min spec. If you can accommodate that, you can have an Azure Stack one node deployed. I guess the highlight here, ensure you have the minimum storage, network, and memory, and then we have a validation or pre-checker that you can run that points out where you might be lacking in that configuration. So some hardware configurations. Make sure you have the minimum number of disks and consistent bus types and sizes. You have ample disk space, and I'll keep highlighting that. And one thing that you'll note, unless you have greater than 8 disks, HDDs, or 5 SSDs, and more than 2 terabytes of RAM, you will be in a simple space, no resiliency. So that means if one of the disks goes down, simple space goes down, you have to redeploy. It doesn't happen that often, but you could see it. Now, if you do have greater than 8 HDDs or greater than 5 SSDs and greater than 2 terabytes of storage, you will be put into a mirrored configuration, which means you're in a resilient state, but your capacity is cut in half. So just some things to consider. Ensure you have sufficient memory beyond the minimum to support workloads, because while you could get it installed, and we've seen people install it on a 64 gig RAM machine, it's basically a doorstop that has Azure Stack on it. It's a platform. You want to deploy things on top of it and use it, right? So 96 gig of RAM, as of when ASDK was released in July, had no problem running the base infra VMs as well as the app service VMs. And that may or may not be true here as we release the next build coming here soon, because there was some modifications in the requirements for app service that I'll talk about later. But I'm hoping they'll all still fit on a 96 gig machine, because that's a nice thing to have, is app service and functions running on a 96 gig machine. But if you wanted app service, SQL RP, and MySQL RP, that's not going to all fit on a 96 gig machine. 128, yes. So recommended would be 128 or greater, but you can get away with quite a bit with 96. We only support IPv4, and VPN connections to Azure are not supported through the NAT. Again, we're behind a NAT, so things aren't, specifically VPN site-to-site to Azure are not supported. Will it work? Will it connect? If you follow the instructions, it probably will, but is it supported? Why did it stop working? No, it's not. This problem goes away with multi-node because we're not behind a NAT. So when is the Azure Stack Dev Kit available? I sort of alluded to this earlier. Well, TP1, I should have made this a test question. TP1 has been available for POC deployment since January 2016. For me, it seems like longer, because I've used it every day since and before. But January 26th is when we made our first TP1 available. We had a TP2 release in September 2016, a TP3 release in March 2017, and we GA'd Azure Stack Development Kit July 2017. And I get this question a lot. In fact, POC is so important, we gave it a new name, Azure Stack Development Kit, for marketing purposes, and sounds cooler than POC. And it will be an offering, period, even post-GA. So there's a little note on the bottom there that says, in development builds will be released on a feature fixed patch availability. I had an intent, being fully transparent, I had an intent at TP3 to have two release types, release build and in-dev build. And what I wanted to do is have release build be the major milestone releases, and the in-dev build be previews of what's coming. Well, deploying or releasing software platforms of this complexity is hard, just to be honest. And getting everything on all the ducks in the row while something else is churning and we haven't GA'd proved itself to be too difficult. So in-dev really never left the ground. We have the ability to do it. If you see the installer, there's two options. One's grayed out. We may eventually do it in the future. But for now, since we've released multi-node, my goal, and you may have heard this in pre-day, my goal right now is to match the release schedule of multi-node. They're getting monthly releases out. I will get a monthly release out of one node, corresponds with that. So at the very least, we'll be current. Now with one node, you have to redeploy, but it's 5 hours, not a big deal. Multi-node, there's the patch and update process. You download the packages and install them. So if you want to keep them current side by side, there's a little bit extra work. But if we are successful with me getting single node builds out every month, then I could start considering taking earlier builds and getting them out, right, through that channel. I'm not promising that right now, but we have the channel, we have the ability to do it, but I want to be successful getting monthly builds out because I haven't done that yet. So that's my goal. So you'll hear more about that in the coming months as we get this next build out and the next and the next. And then if you have feedback on frequency, go ahead and let us know. So why is the Azure Stack Development Kit so important? Well, it's minimum scale. It's got a good similarity to the final production deployment. Now, I get feedback that, hey, it's behind a NAT. It's not integrated into my system. It doesn't have this. You're right, absolutely. So it is not exactly the same as a production deployment. But at the lower levels, right? At the upper levels, though, the services levels, the top of stack, it is exactly the same. But the capacity is obviously different. So you can deploy in that single instance a lot of things that you can deploy on a multi-node. Now, can you deploy something that spans Azure stacks? No, not yet. We have some work to do there. But the idea here is a starting point, and then you take it a little further, or take it all the way with multi-node. And then as we increase the capabilities in one node over time, then it'll become more and more like a production deployment, but not for production. We want it to be similar enough so you could do your development and testing, but obviously you can't run production workloads on it because, well, it could fall over, and that's not a good thing. There's a repeatability of the dev kit experience in production, as I was saying. So the templates that you have gotten started, maybe you tweak some parameters and you could deploy them at scale in multi-node. That's the idea there. The second major reason why is simplicity, ease of speed of deployment, management, and operations, and the reuse of existing collateral. So if you are an Azure customer and you have templates there, if you meet the version requirements, it should just come down and deploy on Azure Stack, one node, multi-node, etc. And finally, flexibility, low cost, and overhead are pretty good reasons to have an Azure Stack. The minimum requirements are fairly easy to be procured and adopted. This is your one DIY opportunity with Azure Stack. And you have multiple deployment options. You could follow the min requirements and do A, B, and C, or you could do large single host machines and do A through X. So lots of options. The other thing is you can have one and have multiple people connected to it so they could mimic the user experience as well as the operator experience. I think this is more of the same, but I'm going to skip this slide because it's just more of the same and it's just my words in marketing speak. So when to use what? This is a much more important slide to spend time on. When to use what? So since the OEM solutions, or the integrated solutions are available now, you could start, or start thinking about planning for those. And that will be where you put your production workloads for Azure Stack. But before then, and maybe while you're waiting, you could start looking at the other two options we have, which is Azure, straight up. You could either use it like you have today because you're an Azure customer. If you want to use it like an Azure Stack, you can also, you could apply a policy, an ARM policy, to restrict the resources in a subscription or resource group. So anything you deploy in there will be like, it's only like what an Azure Stack would be. ASDK, or Azure Stack Development Kit, the middle section, is really used for education on Azure Stack, administration, and application solution development and validation. It allows administrators to experience administrative constructs and just some light administration in Azure Stack. And it allows developers to test their solutions against something that's Azure Stack, but just smaller and easier to manage. So there's some architecture differences between Azure Stack Development Kit and Azure Stack. Multi-node. Scale is the first obvious one. Dev Kit has one node, and multi-node has more than one node. And you've heard it's 4 to 12 right now. And everything coexists on that one node for single node. So all the tenant VM or the user VMs, I should have renamed that. We changed the construct there. All the user VMs and the infrastructure VMs live on that host. That's one of the reasons that you want more RAM, more storage. Resiliency. While mirrored storage configurations are available, depending on how much you have, it is more likely to be configured as a single space or simple space, which means it's way less resilient than the multi-node. And then the network that we talked about a little bit, BGP NAT is the virtual machine that's deployed and that handles the NAT and essentially the routing. And that does not exist in a multi-node configuration. And there's no switch requirements. Everything goes through the single NIC and the specific VMs that are deployed. So a little different than multi-node, but it's really there to get you all the experience of a multi-node in a single box. So what it is and what it isn't. Azure Stack Dev Kit is a non-production deployment of Azure Stack. It's a great place to start when exploring hybrid or modern application development, and a single host that can put together and you deploy it on your own. And of course, most importantly probably, it's your first impression of Azure Stack and possibly other Azure services. Now you may be an Azure customer, that's good, but this would be your first impression of Azure Stack. And you may have already purchased a multi-node and you're just waiting for it to arrive and get configured. This might be your first impression of Azure Stack. So what isn't? What is? Let's just read the slide, Charles. Azure Stack Dev Kit is not to be used as a production environment, period. Well, do I think it may be abused for this? Yes. And we have telemetry, unless you completely, put it behind, behind walls. Am I concerned that it's going to be a big problem? No, because it's not production, it's not resilient. You'll probably only try once, but I really don't recommend it. It's really for kicking the tires dev test. It's not scalable beyond one node. You can't even, in the product now, or you heard that we don't have the ability to add node yet. We will, and when that feature comes to Azure Stack, you won't be able to click on add node and then plop a new one next to it, and it just sucks it in to the pool. It is not a highly available solution. Never was intended to be. And it's not to be deployed outside the defined configuration scripts. In other words, do not modify the scripts that fit to fit in unsupported configuration. What do I mean by this? Does anyone have an idea how people modify this? Smaller hardware, like less memory. That's probably the number one, especially early on in TP1 and TP2. What is the most Why do people do it the most right now? Anyone know? What's that? Domain name, that's another good reason. Domain name or region name changes, all possible, not supported. Different network, also not supported. So you guys are with me, you know what's going on. The number one now, though, is they want to shove it in a nested virtual machine, either on-prem or in Azure. Which is, you know, I'm not saying it's wrong to do, but I'm also saying it's not ready yet. If you've gone, and I have a slide on it, the Azure Stack hands-on experience, I got the slide. I worked and helped with it all, you know, for the past 6 weeks. That is nested in Azure. We have one nodes nested in Azure VMs. They're big VMs. They cost a lot of money. One of the things I was trying to do in that effort was to see if it's resilient yet enough to checkpoint, turn off, you know, save money. It makes sense. There are still some bugs in the current version for one node that really don't make that feasible. There's some other things that we're looking at where I can't say, yes, this is a great solution because you could count on it like it is if it's running on hardware. Is it something we're shooting for? Yes. We want to be able to unlock this ability. When we believe it's ready, what we will do is we will take changes to the product for one node where you don't have to go and modify the scripts to make that work. Because as soon as you modify those scripts and we ask you on the forum, hey, did you change this? And you say yes, we'll go, well, we have to prioritize people who didn't do that first. So first goal is to make sure it's stable enough to do the nested stuff, because that unlocks a lot of other scenarios for people who don't have hardware and things like that. Next is make product changes, and I have a deliverable in that's being prioritized in the future to make that happen. And then we will announce it sometime in the future, and it'll just be a build that comes down. It's not anything special. Until then, just know that it's not supported if you modify those scripts in any of the 4 ways that we discussed. But I can't stop you from doing it, and I don't want to stop you from innovating and trying cool new things, right? But I do have to prioritize the customers who are following the instructions first, and I hope you guys understand that. And since this is all forum community-based, you all can help with the community forum stuff too on the forums, MVP or not, and we can, you know, help grow and innovate in the community together. So some deployment considerations. We have the deployment checker. So basically, this is going to say, run it before or after you've put it into the cloud builder and say, does your hardware fit the prerequisites? We have some plans for this. We'd like it not to be just some script on Script Center. We kind of want to bake it into the deployment experience. But for now, it's basically saying, here's your health check of your hardware. Does it fit? Will you succeed if you just run it out of the box? For those of you who want to hack a little bit, it also tells you where you will need to hack. Obviously, your memory doesn't meet requirements. CPU doesn't meet requirements. I'm not saying to do that, but obviously it's pointing out what the deficiencies are. Now, on the flip side of that, if you have problems, we have documentation and a method to get the logs. So when you file a support or you go to a forum, and then we ask you, hey, here's the workspace, give us your logs, we have a method to do that. At which time we'll probably know that you hacked it or not, and we will help accordingly. Now, like I'm saying, I'm not saying we won't help you. I'm just saying if it's some weird one-off thing, we may not have an answer if it's been hacked. That's the other thing. The reason they're not quote-unquote supported is because we haven't validated them. The other solutions or the other situations, configurations have been validated or validated automatically every day. We don't validate the non-supported things, that's the main reason. So, Azure Stack Tools. This started off as sort of a side site that had a bunch of stuff that would be super helpful. Now, if you realize, and from our page views on GitHub for these, it is very popular, and kind of required. Now, you could do things without this, but if you want to deploy, there's a script that helps you deploy. If you want to register, the only way to register is in there, right? So this is a very important resource, and we keep it up to date. The master branch will always be what's current, what the version is current. So the build that's out now is tuned to master. So the build we have out now is like 2 months old, so master is kind of old. Now if there's a branch in here called vnext, that's where we slot stuff for the next upcoming release. That won't, sometimes it works against the older version that's out, sometimes it doesn't. So don't use vnext, well, you're at your own risk, but vnext is there for the next version kind of thing. And changes there aren't always reflected in, in a backwards compatible way. So, getting started. The best place to get started with DevKit is the documentation. Now, since we released or made generally available the multi-node, the docs have changed slightly. They're still, so the content has both operator and user. And the operator stuff doesn't really apply to one node for obvious reasons, but there's still tutorials and there's still how-to guides for doing all the common things that you might do in an Azure Stack Dev Kit. So documentation for getting started is your best bet. So people often ask, what's new in Azure Stack? Well, since we're going to have a monthly cadence, that's a hard answer. That's a hard question to answer. But what we're going to do is keep this rel notes page up to date. So there'll be a build number. It'll say what's new, what bugs are fixed, things like that. It'll all just be in there for your reference. How many we keep documented at any given time? Obviously, we want you to stay current. But OneNode it's really up to you. But there are so many bug fixes and features that will be coming over time. You'll want to probably stay current. But rel notes, that website, but it's off the docs page. If you just search for rel filter rel in the docs, you'll find it. All right, now for demos and troubleshooting. This is the more exciting part of this, probably. Does anyone have any questions before I get into demos and troubleshooting?
So every time we have to redeploy, you have to re-register?
Yes, that was a pretty good question. Every time you redeploy, do you have to re-register? And the answer is yes. We are evolving the registration scripts. What you'll see, actually, if I get to it in this demo, is that we're moved from just a PS1 file to a module. And it now has 3 functions, which is add, remove, and switch. But that's really that's still for a deployed instance. Essentially, the reason is every time you deploy, you get a cloud ID. And that cloud ID is used in reference to that registration, creating a one-on-one relationship to Azure. If you redeploy, you get a new cloud ID, so it has no bearing. Over time, I'd like to be able to reuse resources so we don't have to re-register or do all the steps of re-registration. But yes, to answer your question, if you redeploy, you have to re-register. Regardless if it's moving forward or because you had to redeploy because something failed. Any other questions before going?
What about performance expectations between the single node and multi-node per se at a given time?
Sure. The question is, what's the performance expectations between the single node and multi-node? For one node, or single node, there is no performance expectations. It really depends on what hardware you throw at it. If you throw at it really slow HDDs and the lowest memory and slow processors, it's going to be slow. The faster hard drives, if you put SSDs or NVMEs in that single node and give it lots of RAM and lots of cores, it'll fly. So that's single node related. Multi-node, the specs from different OEMs will be slightly different. The software is identical, to be clear. What the different OEMs offer, some might be storage intensive or some might be compute intensive. It'll depend on what you want to go with there. But there's no comparing a one node and a multi-node, honestly, from a performance standpoint, because on one node, again, everything's on one machine, right? So if one VM's thrashing around, it takes big noisy neighbor problem on a one node. Multi-node, there's obviously less of that because it's spread out over multiple nodes. All right. So I have some ASDK demos here. So I'm going to start with troubleshooting, remediation. I'll show you Service Fabric Explorers, Privileged Endpoint. I do have some YouTube videos on this, but there's some stuff I'm going to talk about that's not been talked about yet. I'm going to kick off a deployment with the ASDK installer PS1 script that you have seen or may have seen. This all depends on time. We got 35 or so minutes, so if you want to bear with me. If I don't get into any of this, I have lots of booth time. Happy to sit one-on-one with any of you. ASDK operations, I'm going to show you the UX for the XRPs, capacity update. I'm going to add an ADFS user for ASDK to show you how to add users. It's not as obvious it is for AAD. And then I can do plans, offers, subscriptions. I could show a registration, and then I was going to show app service and functions, but I'm going to have to show you how to prep for it, since hence my moving the troubleshooting up to the top, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So I prepped Sunday, had all my machines ready, and was okay, here's my plan. And I wrote down all the list of things I was going to demo, and I checked on it yesterday. Then I checked on it this morning on my primary machine. I have 3 machines I'm going to use. My primary machine, I went to go just to the portal, and I got this. You may experience this in your time when you use an Azure Stack Development Kit. This particular deployment has been running for many, many days. It had app service, had a whole bunch of cool stuff on it. It's my primary demo machine. And I come to this. Well, I troubleshoot OneNodes daily. I've resurrected many of them from various bad spots. And I was like, I could fix this. I got 2 hours. I could fix this. That was like 4 hours ago, but still. I could fix this. So first thing I do when I see this page is I go, because I've run into this before, I go, let's check out Hyper-V. And again, you cannot do this in a multi-node. Everything I'm doing right now is not a multi-node thing. I just want to make that clear. Because remember, there's only 3 ways to interact with a multi-node: portals, API, or that privilege endpoint, which is used for your support cases and things like that. So I opened up Hyper-V, and I saw this. Not a great state for your OneNode. You can see, though, I did deploy app service. There are these VMs. There's the file server. There's the worker tier. So sure, those VMs are still running, and I could use them if I wanted to, but that doesn't make for much of a demo without the portal. But all the important ones are in a save state, and I'm like, no, this is the worst case scenario for OneNode. Because, does anyone know what the problem is? Got it. So, some of you have seen this before. So the next thing I do is go into Failover Cluster Manager. Again, can you do this in a multi-node? No. Okay. Then why do we make it available and tease you in a single node? Well, I don't have an answer to that question. So I go here, and oh, look, it's healthy. Is this recoverable without redeployment? No. Do you know why? Because in order to delete the things I would need to delete, I'd need to be in with the APIs and do it properly. If I go in, and yes, I have access to the blob storage from a file system, and I could hack things away, but that really messes things up long term. So unfortunately, the only way out of this situation is to, A, not get into the situation and watch your storage, and I wasn't. But it's only to redeploy. So I wanted to show you that, and in fact, if I go back to my slides, which I made this slide special for you today, I had when your ASDK fails, but I didn't want to be so pessimistic. If your ASDK fails, these are the top 5 things you can look for before you redeploy. I made this just like an hour ago because I needed this information for you guys. Number 1, is the storage full? If so, redeploy. I'm sorry. I'll get to these others in a minute, but I want to kick off the redeployment because I was going to show you redeploy anyway, so now I get the chance on this. It's a good thing I had 3 machines. So I'm going to go back to here, and this is a goner. So what I'm going to do is, what I did is I downloaded the ASDK installer PS1. I mean, I've had it on this machine for a while. I'm going to use this to redeploy, and then I'm going to copy this we'll probably not get through all of this because I got other things to do, but the concept here is I'm just going to redeploy, but I'm going to show you what that looks like. So if you're in a situation like this, or the portals are done, or some other reason you have to redeploy, there's a fairly simple process to do it. And it's let's kick this script off again, which I have staged here. It opens up this UX, which you primarily, if you've seen it before, you've done it to deploy. And there's a couple things. Now, if there's a support case kind of thing, or a support case, forum support, and we ask you to get logs, there's a nice giant button here you can click to help you get logs. But really, in this case, we've learned we need to redeploy. And the first thing to do that is to reboot. And unfortunately, my base OS is a really old OS, but I'm going to reboot back to the base OS. I'm going to copy a new cloud builder over. I'm going to boot back into the cloud builder and then redeploy. That's the process. I wanted to show you this UX, though, because it does help you in both deployment from scratch, redeployment, and kicking off install. So I'm just going to hit reboot on that. We won't see that VM again, or that host again, depending on how things go. That one's gone. Now, back to these other troubleshooting steps. Because I've been validating on nested for a while, we ran into a lot of things when we paused or checkpointed the VM, and one node really didn't like being used like that. So I ran into a lot of issues that we see just in general on the hardware, just in different ways. So one of the first things I see, like if the portal's not loading or something like that, and it's odd because you're like, it was just loading yesterday and you still have enough storage. Go check in SQL, go check to see if SQL service is running. Now in general, that's pretty easy to do. I'll go to my everything else thing here. And basically, if you want to check SQL at any time in a deployed, as you can see this is a deployed environment, just do enter PS session, and then AZS, SQL, or whatever, 01. And this is just a smoke test to see if SQL's up. Then I just do get service SQL. And if these are stopped, well, that's a problem. Because this is where WAP and SRP are stored. And without, I don't know why we still call it WAP. It's not WAP. It's Azure. It's the subscriptions and stuff. All the subscription, everything that you need to get into the portal and how it looks and all that good stuff is in a SQL database. If the SQL database is stopped, things don't work in the portal. So if these are stopped, try to start them. If they don't start, go and investigate why. See what the error message is. It might be various things. It could be a password or something. So check to see if SQL's running. If it is, you're good to go. So portal loading issues, like SQL's working, you have enough storage, the portal's still not loading, what can I do? So we had a bug in the build that you have from the public build, and I think it'll be fixed in the next release, but there was GMSA accounts that weren't getting, after the WASP or WAS VMs were rebooting, the services weren't starting. So IIS reset was the fastest way. Now that does clear up a lot of things. It's the magic fix button for a lot of website stuff. So that is an option to go to the WAS or WASP VMs and run that command. I'm not going to do that in this environment, but again, you can just enter PS session, WAS 01, and run IIS reset, and then wait a minute. But if you want to see get website, these are all the websites that are running on that WAS VM that are servicing up the admin portal. Again, none of this is relevant for multi-node. But if these aren't started, that was another indication that you're going to have problems, right? Okay, no questions. All right, next one is portal login issues. I hit this with another environment I was helping troubleshoot earlier. It all came down to a time sync issue. So what had happened is along with the portal, it lets me log in and then goes, which is cute the first time. Not the 5th, 6th, 100th time you get, something went wrong. So I did everything. I did all the things I could normally do. The last thing I did was like, I haven't logged in via PowerShell in this environment. So I was like, set it all the environment, logged into PowerShell. It said, your token says this time, and this is this time. I was like, oh, it's a time sync issue. Now, there's a bug, and I think it's still a bug in the OneNode for time, and I'll show you. Enter PS session, DC. All the host and all the VMs use the DC as its time server, right? The DC is supposed to use an external time server that you provide during deployment as the thing, right? So what is it? W32TM query source. Unfortunately, there's a bug where it gets assigned to free running system clock, which means it's just using its hard drive or the CMOS clock. Well, it's a VM and it doesn't have a CMOS clock, so it can get out. It could drift. If this drifts too far, as you know, for time sync, its use Kerberos stops working. But especially if you're in an AD scenario and there's some other thing keeping good time in the internet, and you're not keeping good time, you're going to get out of sync. Now, there's ways to fix this. We post them on the forum quite often. Basically, you need to set this clock to pool.ntp.org or time.windows.com, and everything else will sync to it over time, and you'll be fine. But that saved my bacon yesterday when I was fixing another environment where we thought we were going to redeploy, and I just checked the time sync, resynced, and everything just started working again. So check your time. And there's various other commands that we have on the forum to test that. So the last thing I'll talk about here is the portal issues, just general, like you're seeing no access or some other strange stuff in the portal. You're logged in, but things are just kind of wonky. Whether you're in Chrome or Edge or IE, you could hit F12, you could go into the network or console, and even if you're not familiar with that space, when you see red, you could go, that looks odd, and you could start to get clues. I'm not saying to be an expert in this stuff, but at the very least you could start to get clues, because sometimes it throws the krill thing is not working, which means your revocation server needs, reboot, IIS reset your CA or something like that. Or storage, SRP is having trouble. Reset your ACS VM. I'm not saying it's going to be definitive, but it will get you down a path that will likely save you time rather than redeployment. That's really all I'm trying to save you time there. And then sometimes it's just the XRP is in a bad state. And you can find that out in a couple ways. And actually what I'm going to show you next are the Service Fabric Explorers. So you can see I have a healthy Azure Stack, OneNode, and here. Actually, what I'm going to show you here, how many of you use the Service Fabric Explorers in Azure Stack yet? There's not a lot you can do, but they're kind of fun to look at because it kind of gives you under the covers. But mostly you're going to probably look at the XRP. There's 3 rings, Service Fabric rings in Azure Stack. XRP is one of them. And when it prompts you, so and I made a video on this and everything, but it's AZS-XRP01:19007. And then what you want to do is just / Azure Stack Admin, and then the password. And what this is going to do is load up the Service Fabric Explorer, and it will tell you the health state of your Service Fabric applications. If this is all red, there's probably an issue. But I've seen this mostly red, and it's still working. So you've got to sort of use it as a litmus test and see how things are going. And like I said, you can cause a lot of damage here. There are things you could take down the nodes and things like that. So unless you're used to Service Fabric, you just use this as a, that's red. I'm going to think about that while I continue to troubleshoot or tell forum or whatever kind of thing. Now, I said there were 3 rings. There's this XRP ring. There's the storage or ACS ring. Again, same. And ACS is the storage ring. So if there's problems there, that would help. You maybe reboot the ACS VM or something like that. And honestly, if there's XRP problems, you reboot the XRP VM. But don't do it through the portal, because that puts it in a bad state. Just go to Hyper-V, log in, reboot. Same goes for all this stuff. Again, not instructions for multi-node. I guess I have the fun job. I can do whatever I want in OneNode. And then there's the ECRS ring, which is the seed ring, which is where the sort of the base, where everything happens. This is where the privileged endpoint stuff runs and kind of thing like that. The other thing to prevent you from doing this kind of thing in multi-node is that we actually are deleting the Azure Stack admin credential. It's a domain admin. We're not going to give folks the domain admin credentials to the appliance, right? There is a cloud admin credential that you will use in concert with talking to support and things like that. So these three are the Service Fabric explorers for the services. It looks like I have a healthy deployment. I'm pretty good to go. But in the case that you didn't have a healthy deployment, you can sort of use this as a litmus test to see, pinpoint where the issue might be and then what VM you might be able to restart. And I think that was it from troubleshooting. Privilege endpoint. So we have 19 minutes, depending on the questions. So I get to the privilege endpoint in a little bit. What I want to do is show you this, since we're on this healthy Azure Stack. Now, what I was going to do is deploy or show you app service, and I can't do that because it's not deployed. Up to this point, all I've done since I found out my other machine was broken, was this bit of transcript here. I installed PowerShell, as you probably have done many times before. I created and logged into my Azure Stack environment, and then I added a VM image, a Windows Server VM image, and that just finished a little while ago. So if we go here, more services, CRP or compute, we'll see one image in here, and it's the Windows Server one that I just added. Now, from here, because I'm going to deploy app service on this, and if you want to see what that looks like, come see me at the booth later. From here, I can do everything with app service I need to do. Now, there are a couple new requirements for app service that you may or may not be aware of, since I don't know when you've deployed it last. Now you need to deploy a file server. Just a standalone file server. There's a template for it. It's not a big deal. Just, kick that off. You have to have a SQL Server instance, not SQL RP. SQL RP doesn't do that anymore. It's just an RP that needs its own instance. So you could do a SQL Server. Now you could get that SQL Server from syndication, or you can use it from the GitHub, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. And then you use the app service deployment scripts, put in all the prerequisites that you've already done, and kick it off. So the one I'm going to do for you here, in the interest of time, is show you the SQL Server that I use when I'm going to deploy app service. And I have not registered or syndicated this, and I probably will get to that. But that VM, and just from my experience, that machine is 127 gig download. I obviously don't have time to do that right now. And I don't necessarily have the space in my storage to do that. The other environment that ran out of storage, well, it was using the 127. So there's a faster way, and it's to use the template that's in GitHub. Now, how many of you know we have a direct link to the Azure Stack templates in GitHub from this portal? Well, now you do, and I'm going to show you how. So this button right here, in Azure, this links to the Azure Quick Starts. But in Azure Stack, it links to the Azure Stack GitHub for templates. And what I deploy is the SQL 2014 standalone. And I hit save. And then I just edit the parameters. I leave everything the way it is. Put a password in here. And that 2016 data center Windows, that's the one that I showed you. It's available. Hit OK. I'm going to call this SQL for App Service RG. And then hit create. And then like 30 minutes or so, it's going to have the VM deployed. It's going to use DSC to pull down or custom script or DSC to pull down the SQL media, install SQL, and it'll be done. It'll give me a public IP address, and that's what I leverage in my app service deployment, is that public IP address and the login for SQL. And then that's part of the requirements for app service. And again, that will take a little bit of time. So I'm going to switch gears here a little bit, because that's got some time to bake. And I'm going to show you, remember in that one environment, I rebooted back to the base OS. Well, I have another environment that was reboot back to the base OS, then I copied a Cloud Builder, and then I booted into the Cloud Builder. I'm going to show you how to kick off deployment, because I think that's one of the key things that folks do. So I'm going to go to this environment. And again, using that same script, ASDK installer, and you can see here, I'm in the Cloud Builder, that, VHD that I copied over today. In fact, if we look, 926, this is the new Cloud Builder I copied over, and then I'm booted into it, as you can see, because it's the C drive. If you want more proof, we could check the startup settings here. It's booted into the Azure Stack one, not the base OS. You can see that. All right. So I'm going to use the same, darn it, ASDK installer script. And you remember when I ran it the first time, there was 2 giant buttons, get logs and reboot, right? When you're in the Cloud Builder, it's going to have two different giant buttons, or maybe one different giant button. Install and reboot, right? So I could reboot back to the base OS for some reason. I don't know why I would do that, but you could. Or you could install. And what this is, all this is going to do is format the PowerShell kickoff script to kick off install Azure Stack POC.ps1. What I'm going to do is just ADFS, and then give it password, which is the password of the local admin that I set up on the previous step, which I forgot apparently. My shift key doesn't work sometimes, so let's see. Yep, that was it, shift key. And you remember in previous revisions that you had to go and disable the other NICs? Well, what this is doing is querying the NICs and going, pick the one you want, I'll disable them for you. We're just trying to make it easier and less error prone. Next. I'm going to use DHCP, but you could change static configuration. And it is requiring a time server IP, and it requires an IP address now. This is the latest version that when you redeploy the latest version, you'll need to do this. So what I'm going to just do is ping time.windows.com. This is not the best method to get a time server IP, but, well, it's hot up here. So it's an IP address for a time server. It could be an internal time server that you have. It could be a VIP of a time server. You can go to pool.ntp.org on the internet and look for a time server IP. There's lots of different ways to do that. Next. It's going to do a little validation of the network interface card and apply a fix if it needs to. Next. Then it's showing me what it's going to kick off. Basically, it's just install Azure Stack POC, the password, use ADFS, and a time server. That's all it's going to do. Hit deploy. It spawns another PowerShell window, and it's kicked off. If everything goes well, in 5 hours or whatever, I come back, I log in as Azure Stack admin, not the local admin, and I have an Azure Stack ready to go like I have in the other environment. It's that simple to kick it off. Now, if it has a problem, well, you're going to gather logs and tell us about it and use the forum so we can help you through that. And I will tell you, for the nested stuff that we've been testing, deployment doesn't fail because it's a well-known set, right? Where we hit the most issues with deployment is everyone has different hardware. They're cobbling it together, right? It's just we don't know what you have, driver version, firmware version. It could be anything. And that is the #1 evidence of why when someone goes, can I deploy Azure Stack Production on my own hardware? We go, well, if OneNote is any evidence of that, it's probably not a good idea. That's one of the main reasons we go integrated systems, because we can control what that looks like, and so you can have a better experience. And deployments should be only done once, right? When OneNote, it's done all the time. So, but this is just going to hum along for a little while. So I guess I have a little bit of time left. I sort of kicked that piece off. That's less important. I could show that if someone's interested one-on-one. Would you rather see registration or the privileged endpoint? Registration, hands? Privilege endpoint? Okay, privilege endpoint it is. All right, so privilege endpoint on a one node is interesting, but and kind of useful because you got to kick the tires on a privilege endpoint, but it's not, absolutely not a requirement. Can you get logs from the privilege endpoint? Yes, you can. Do you have to? No, you could just use the host and get logs. But if you want to sort of start mimicking what it's going to be like in a multi-node environment, leveraging the privilege endpoint is probably your best bet. So what I'm going to do here is enter PS session, and then computer name. Oh, I got to exit that one. That would have been great. So enter PS session. I'm going to try this from memory. Computer name, AZS ERC01. Configuration name is what I'm looking for next. And that's privileged endpoint. I think I spelled that right. Because it's a GIA endpoint. So we have a named GIA endpoint called privilege endpoint. And then credential, and I'm just going to do git. Now, regardless of one node, multi-node, because it's a GIA endpoint, we had to identify a specific user that has permissions to do the things in this endpoint. So this, on all systems, is Azure Stack, the domain name, cloud admin. So in one node, it's Azure Stack cloud admin, and then the password. Hopefully, we'll get a connection. I probably spelled something wrong. It's neat. In the meantime, hold please. I was going to try to do it from memory, but I'll cheat. That's fine. I think I did this though, so. Yes, I spelled it wrong. ERCS, not ERC. Why did you guys catch that? I know the font's like 2. Which is a good point. That should help a little. Okay, so I've now in the privilege endpoint. The reason, one thing you can know how that is there's no tab complete because we don't have all the goodness of PowerShell in these endpoints because that would open up threats. So, but I could do git command. And you see the subset of commands that are available. Now, the RP deployments and the app service and all that stuff deployments are going to start going through here. So we had to, and registrations are going to go through here. So we had to start whitelisting more commands. So there's like register, or there's a lot of them now. Get Azure Stack. Of course, I can't find it. Anyway, we're whitelisting more things as we add things that have to go through this. The more things that go through this, the better, because it's a privileged endpoint, and everything's logged and everything. So one of the main things folks will use this for is get Azure Stack log, but again, make sure you have your command ahead of time because you can't tab complete in here. So paste get Azure Stack log with your time and date stuff and roles, and run it. Get stamp information might be information. Get Azure Stack stamp information. You could run on anything. It'll basically just output how many nodes and stuff like that. It'll be one node and how much RAM, whatnot. But this is where you unlock your support session and work with, so you can see all the goodies here. And this is part of, this is logged and how it was deployed, what's the external domain FQDN. So it's a lot of cool stuff that's in here. But essentially, this is the third entrance into a multi-node, but obviously you could sort of kick the tires and see what's going on here. And then some of the stuff you do, like registration, hits this remotely when you execute the commandlets. And I think finally what I wanted to show, we got 5 minutes, and I give a little bit of time. Obviously, this is still baking. That'll be done later. I want to show some of the other UX here. The update tile, obviously OneNode's not going to use this. Can you take the packages you get for multi-node, shove them in here and use the same process? Yes. Can you hit the update button? Mm-hmm. What's going to happen? Well, the first thing it does is drain the node. I don't know if we've blocked that action on OneNode. I hope we have. But again, if you hit the update button and tell Failable Cluster Manager to drain the node, then I guess you get what you paid for. But this is the same mechanism. So even in the hands-on experience, we show you what to do. Just don't hit the update now button. I guess on the lab, I'm not telling you to do it, but other UX experiences that are slightly new. Oh, and as I guess a joke, not a joke, it wasn't funny. I ran out of storage on the other node. I don't think I'll run out here. This is an example of a slightly overpowered OneNode environment. 0.5 terabyte of RAM, 15 terabytes of storage. So I could do a lot on here. I could put a lot of stuff on here. Kind of excited to start playing with. We just got these and had to go through a lot of hoops to start using them. But I'm going to deploy app service on here, SQL, MySQL RP. This could become my primary demo box. But yeah, I'm not worried about capacity on this one. And then other things that have UX. You've seen the storage UX for admin hasn't changed. So that's similar. It shows you storage accounts. You can recover storage accounts if you have the retention policy changed. It will tell you the capacity of the storage and whatnot, of the tenant storage. And then registration, which I didn't get to, but I could show you if you're interested. We'll have videos and stuff on it. But it's essentially a PowerShell module. Enter some fields, and you're off to the races. So we got 2 minutes and 39 seconds left. Anyone have any questions, comments? And I have stickers if anyone's interested. So it's like Halloween.
This is related to redeployment.
Uh-huh.
So anything I have done, just downloading something from the market. So
Yep.
That also goes away.
Everything goes away. Essentially, let me show you what happens. So everything you're doing is put into this Cloud Builder VHD, which you can see is quite large now, right? When I copied it, it was 25 gig. Now it's expanded. It's got a whole bunch of stuff on it. Everything you do is there. When you boot back to the base OS, the first step in redeployment is delete that. And you may shed a tear and go, I spent a lot of time on that. And I did earlier when I did it in front of you. No, whatever. I was sweating, so it counts. So yeah, it goes away. Anything you've done in that environment goes away. So, and that's with any one node, whether you're doing it for redeployment because I have to fix it or redeployment because it's the new one, right? Now, there's not a lot of options we have for saving that stuff off. What I do is anything I deploy is just scripted, so I don't have to think about it again. I have just the thing I go through and I run that. Some folks have put entire ARM templates out there that essentially redeploy the environment back to how it was. It's really up to you, but we don't have any backup or recovery for OneNode because it's not intended to stay long enough, right? But everything you do should either be treat it like very DevOps-y, right? This is just cattle. You're just going to do stuff to it. It's going to go away. You do stuff to it again, go away. That's my only advice on this. It's not meant to be, a pet, even though it takes a lot of time.
If you've done some dev work,
Uh-huh.
then
Yes, but that dev work shouldn't be done in isolation in an Azure Stack. In my opinion, it probably should be done outside and pulled in and then deployed into. That's the advice there. Now, if you're doing VMs, I mean, there's probably, you could save off the VHDs somewhere. I don't know how you, I mean, that's a lot of work, probably more work than just having it, you know, infrastructure as code and, you know, deploying from repos and stuff like that. That's really the best advice we have. Now, I'm not saying you have to redeploy every month. Don't, if you don't want to. If the release notes don't say something interesting or a bug fix that you've been waiting for, don't do it. OneNote is your option. There are some things that will happen over time. You will run out of storage unless you have 1,000,000 terabytes of RAM or hard drive space. And passwords will expire, which you will have to mitigate. But in general, you can keep it for up to, I think, 180 days until SQL times out. And we can't get around that's a SQL licensing issue we're not going to argue with. So if you wanted to, and it stayed up for 180 days, go for it. But if you come to us with a problem and you're on version 2017.old, we'll be like, that's fixed in this version, then you'll have to think about redeployment. 45 seconds. Any other questions? Or it's counting up now, isn't it? Darn it. Yes, never mind. I don't have any questions. If you have questions, come see me. I'll be happy to talk with you. Thank you for sticking around, and I hope that was helpful.